Okay. So again, thank you everyone for being here with us this evening online. It is wonderful to see all of you. My name is Mara Bernstein. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Advancement Associate at Indiana University Libraries. And so I am delighted to sort of kick things off here this evening. Just some Zoom information. Please keep yourself muted. Please be advised we are recording and we do plan to share this publicly. So please feel free to keep your camera off or not have your name displayed, but it is really wonderful to see you. So if you would like to turn your camera on and share your name, and also in the chat, share where you're watching from and what your relationship to IU is. So we are, again, very happy you are here joining us for Wylie House Contemporary Art, Marginalized Voices, Historic Spaces. And before we get started, I will read our land acknowledgement. Indiana University, apologies. Indiana University wishes to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that Indiana University Bloomington is built on indigenous homelands and resources. We recognize the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We are dedicated to amplifying indigenous voices and perspectives, improving community relationships, correcting the narrative, and making the IU Bloomington campus a more supportive and inclusive place for Native and Indigenous students, faculty, and staff. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. At this time, I am delighted to turn it over to Carey Champion, Director of Wylie House Museum. Carey.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much, Mara. Again, I'm Carey Champion. Welcome to tonight's program. This is a first for me, so I think it's going to be fantastic. So before I introduce you to our special guest, the incredible artist who contributed to the contemporary art exhibition featured at Wylie House Museum this year, I want to provide you with some background and context. The exhibition, entitled Call and Response, Creative Interpretations of Wylie House, opened in March as part of IU Bloomington campus's spring arts and humanities programming called Indiana Remixed. Indiana Remixed is a semester-long celebration of contemporary Indiana art and ideas, and IU Arts and Humanities was our sponsor for this exhibition. The idea behind Call and Response being that contemporary Indiana artists could help Wylie House Museum interpret and share the stories and histories of the lesser known and marginalized people associated with the 1835 house. For several years, the museum has been broadening and deepening our interpretation of the historic home to tell the stories not only of IU's first president, Andrew Wylie, as wonderful as he was, but also the many other people who lived in the home and in the geographic region. Unfortunately, as you know, documents and objects which we rely upon at the museum, those that are related to marginalized people in society are less likely to be valued and therefore not saved or preserved, leaving us with information gaps in our interpretive narratives. And that's where the art comes in. Art has the power to communicate and share stories in ways that words sometimes simply cannot. So in the fall of 2019, a call went out to Indiana artists, inviting them to respond to the Wylie House Museum's history with original works of art. Specifically, they were invited to tell the stories of the lesser known people, such as the woman who ran the home, the family members or student boarders who may have identified as what we would now refer to as LGBTQ+, Elizabeth Breckenridge, a Black woman who worked as a domestic servant in the home for the majority of her life. The Native Americans who were being forcefully removed from their homeland as the Wylies were moving and settling into their home. And the immigrants encountering a new world in Southern Indiana as it developed in its early statehood. Each of the final 8 artists proposed the subject of their work as well as the location of their pieces in or outside of the home. They installed their work the last week of February, and the exhibition opened on Thursday, March 5th. Then, due to COVID-19, the museum, along with the university, closed just the following week. While this was incredibly disappointing and all of the intended workshops and artist talks and programs associated with the exhibition were unable to happen, we have really been able to make the best of it. In fact, there have been many silver linings for Call and Response. With the help of many talented people at IU, Wylie House Museum has been able to pivot pretty quickly to keep the exhibition accessible to IU classes and the general public. IU's virtual technologies team helped us create a robust digital virtual tour for Call and Response, in which you can explore the house and the art. The artists created short videos to introduce their pieces, and we were able to embed those into the virtual tour. And we were also able to include audiovisual aspects of the artwork with help from that virtual technologies team. We continue to improve upon the tour, adding close-up images of the artwork with the help from IU photographers. And if you haven't done so yet, I invite you to visit the virtual tour to enjoy all 19 of the works of art throughout the museum. Mara, you can share a link, I think, to that for everybody in the chat. And perhaps also the link to the exhibition's website. COVID-19 and our closure also helped inform this online website for the exhibition. Our graduate student employee, Mary McSparron, initially created the website to accompany the physical exhibition. Since our closure, she has worked diligently to expand the exhibition website to include information and photographs about each piece of art, added artist spotlight pages, included photographs from artist studio visits, the installation process, and the opening reception. In addition to living on through digital mediums, the Call and Response exhibition has inspired us to improve upon our work with IU classes, interpretive tour, and digital exhibits by really compelling us to ask more questions and conduct deeper research so that we might better represent these important histories moving forward. So 4 of the 8 artists are here with us tonight: Joann Quiñones, Molly Evans, Sarah Edmands Martin, and Sean Starowitz. Each of them will share a little bit about themselves and the art that they created for Call and Response. It has been my absolute joy and pleasure to get to know each of them and to work with them. I'm delighted that you get to spend some time with them this evening. So let's get started. First, I'd like to introduce you to Joann Quiñones. Joann has a PhD in American Literature and is currently an associate professor of English at Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana. She also has an MFA in studio art from Indiana University, which she completed in 2019. Joann has shown work at Manifest Gallery in Cincinnati, Ohio, Higher Art Gallery in Traverse City, Michigan, and Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana, as well as the National Council on Education for Ceramic Arts annual exhibition in Richmond, Virginia, among other locations. Earlier this year, Joann was competitively selected as a 2020 Emerging Artist by Ceramics Monthly. Combining fiber, sculpture, and ceramics, her figurative works explore the connections between history, race, gender, and sexual identity. Welcome, Joann.
Thank you. Okay, that was a lovely introduction. And everyone can hear me okay? Great. I'm going to share my screen because I'm very interested in talking about the project. So my project was called Seeing Lizzie. And so Elizabeth Breckenridge was a Black woman who worked for the Wylie family for 54 years. And the first time I went to the Wylie House was actually when I was thinking of the process of submitting a proposal to do artwork for the Wylie House. And the Wylie House is beautiful. By training, I'm a 19th century Americanist, and I loved all the artifacts, all the time period pieces, and it was lovely. The thing that struck me pretty powerfully was that Even though Elizabeth Breckenridge had worked in the home for so long, there was very little to mark her physical presence in the home. And so for my project, and I'm very happy that Carey was so accommodating, instead of making one sculpture in one room of the house, I decided to make multiple artifacts and place them all throughout the home, because really without her labor, it was important to highlight how invaluable her labor was to the maintaining and the functioning of that home. And so juxtaposing made objects with rearranged Wylie House items, I really was hoping that visitors would question the relationships that existed with Lizzie as both the center and the focus. So the purpose of the artifacts are to bring Elizabeth Breckenridge a little bit more center to kind of mark her presence in the home. And why does that matter? I think for me, most of my own artistic practice is based on artifacts, archival research. And so household items are ultimately ways of communicating who matters socially and who does not. And so that was the challenge of the piece. And so really, I just have sort of pictures of the artwork and some of the archival material that really inspired some of the pieces. And so this is a photograph of Elizabeth Breckenridge. And it's a lovely photograph. And this was the picture of the house. And so the first piece that I made was actually the house in the background with her image sort of superimposed and kind of ghostly. And so the frame mimics the frame across the way that looks, it's the portrait of Andrew Wylie. And so this is the same photograph, but then turned into a silhouette. And as one of the family, Carey was wonderful to recommend that we should put it outside in the hallway. And I think for a domestic, where I think a lot of people would think of, they're like one of the family. I think the silhouette asks questions. All the other silhouettes of the family members are inside this room on the mantle. And Lizzie is part of the family in a way, but outside and doing labor as a full figure silhouette. And that's a close-up of the silhouette. It's an inverted silhouette. The broom, I was thinking a lot about Elizabeth Breckenridge's personal history and how she never married. We don't know why. But the expression, the African-American expression of jumping the broom as symbolizing marriage. So this is a shaker broom that's tiled and placed in the area where we thought the master bedroom would have been for the Wylie family. And so it's important to think about how she did support this marriage in her own way. This is sort of like a typical 1830s kind of candelabra that would have been on the mantle. And these are the kind of figures that would have been around 1910s to 1920s, 30s, and this is an iron doorstop. And so a lot of my process is collecting antiques and going into antique stores and creating artificial objects. And so this is the candelabra on the mantle. Lots of antique shopping. And just to create pieces that would be time period accurate and would actually fit into the decor of the house. My screen is freezing. Oh, and so these are just more of the objects placed in the house. And it's lovely to actually have the artifacts in the house. This piece is called Quiet as It's Kept, which is the first line of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And this piece is a reference to the Underground Railroad in Indiana. And this is a photo of Elizabeth Breckenridge. And this is a memory jug in memory of her labor. Favorite photo of Elizabeth Breckenridge, and the last piece at the top of the stairs. So I'm more than happy to answer questions when appropriate, but thank you for letting me share.
Oops, thanks so much, Joann. There's so many questions that I want to ask you and things I want you to be able to share, but we're going to hold off on questions for just a little while because I know there's so much to each of those pieces. So my next introduction is for Molly Evans. Molly is a fiber artist, educator, and arts advocate who recently moved from Bloomington to Tampa, Florida, where she teaches at the University of Tampa. Molly received an MFA in fibers from Indiana University and a BFA in fibers from Savannah College of Art and Design. She primarily works with experimental quilts and soft sculpture, using the motion and construction of textiles to display gestures of emotional effort. She is a co-founder of the Fiber Arts Bloomington Studio, a dye lab focusing on natural dye research and workshops for the community. Her work has been featured nationally and in numerous publications, including The Guardian, The Huffington Post, Ignat, and Bust Magazine, among others. So welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much, Carey. I'm so excited to be here. Let me just get ourselves set up here. Here we go. Okay. Awesome. Whew. Well, greetings from sunny Florida, everyone. I'm here visiting you guys on Zoom from Tampa. I spent 6 years in IU and I miss it, and I hope everyone's doing great there. Before I start, I have lots of thank yous to give. Thank you to Carey and to the Wylie House Museum for making this exhibition possible, and also to all the volunteers who participated in my project, which then made it possible. So thank you to everyone that loaned their voice in reading letters to make the sound installation. So the Bishi project is the project that I facilitated. It's a participatory sound installation in that LGBTQIA+ readers of all genders and sexual orientations and ages volunteered their time and their voices to read letters that were found in the Wylie House archives. And these letters are specifically between two people, Elizabeth Bishop, who is a lesbian poet and became our Poet Laureate of the United States in 1950. So this was her teenage correspondence with her sweetheart, who is this cutie pie, Louise Bradley. And Louise Bradley, her connection to the Wylie House is that she is the great-granddaughter of Rebecca and Theophilus A. Wylie. And Elizabeth and Louise met at Camp Checkasset in 1925-ish. And they wrote letters to each other for over 25 years. So the documentation in these letters in the Wylie House archive starts in 1925 and goes all the way up past 1950. I have these letters, the recordings are uploaded and you can access them through the virtual tour. But I will say the one that's the most popular is November 16th, 1926. And it's the first minute and a half in which Elizabeth discusses her new girlfriend, Barbara, her love for Louise, and her secret plan to blow up IU because Louise Bradley was going to IU and was having apparently a hard time of it, which is very interesting. So for my process for this project, I read through each letter. Of course, like any good textile artist, I got to know my material, right? And what it became is this giant stack of letters on my nightstand that was read like a novel. I just loved it. And my partner, Deb, would grab them and, read ahead, and I'd have to wait in suspense to see what happened in, 1940 or whatever. But as I kept reading them, I realized how much I wanted to read these aloud, and I did, just to get a feel for how the older language sounded in contemporary tongue, right? And what I realized in that reading is that I wanted to read them aloud, but I also wanted everyone to read them aloud, because this is one story of one relationship that oscillated between love and friendship in kind of this back and forth way. And these could be stories of anyone if they had also had the privilege of having a written archive of their experience of getting older and falling in love with someone in the same sex. So that's what I did. I put out a call for queer and LGBTQIA+ readers to read these letters. And what I would do is get to know them, the person that wanted to read. And because I read all the letters, I could kind of find one little nugget that would help them to feel more connected to the project. And so once we had the recordings, people would call in and record. I programmed a 1930s candlestick intercom, like a house intercom, with all of the recordings that we have so far on it. And you would think that, because I'm a textile and fiber artist, that this was kind of a far reach from my normal studio practice, but it's actually the second project that I've done that is in this storytelling vein. In 2016, I did a closet piece in which, when you slid garments across the garment, across the closet rod, you would hear the stories that I had to go with each piece and how it pertained to my identity. So once the piece was all wired up, it was good to go. And here it is installed in the Wylie House. You can see it in and interact with it in the interaction in the link in the chat window. With each, if you ever get to go in, well, Wylie House gets to have people in there, and you can use it and wash it, you know, before and afterward. When you press the buttons, you can click through all the letters that were read in that year. So, and there's also a desk in which you can read along with the letters, and we did our best to make the copies as realistic in its tactility of the original letters. In closing, I was thinking about preparing for today, and I was thinking about how to explain the connections to my own studio practice. As a soft sculpture artist and a quilter, I'm often working with fabrics to make physical those things that we keep inside, those emotions and those efforts, those stories. And this often segues into quilting and gathering around a quilt to tell stories. And the experimental part of my practice is sometimes I blow these quilts up quite large. And in this particular format, you're paired with one other person, and you're creating a line between the two of you and going back and forth and trusting that the other person's not going to hurt you and not going to damage you with a needle, and that you're going to work together to finish the art object, right? And so it's that kind of sense of belonging and that timeless connection that I felt a real draw to with these materials to create the Bishie project. So thanks so much for listening. I'm so excited to talk to you guys about the work, and thank you again to everyone who participated in the project and made it possible.
Thanks so much, Molly. I want to share with everybody, I don't know if it was clear that in Molly's work, the way the piece initially works is that when you walk into the room where the phone is hung, there's a motion sensor, and so the phone rings, which I
forgot.
It invites you.
It's very creepy.
It's a very quiet historic house, and then the phone rings, but it's really powerful, and it's really an invitation to listen to those letters being read. Okay, so next I'd like to welcome Sarah Edmands Martin. Sarah teaches graphic design at Indiana University and has presented at the World Design Summit in both Montreal and Paris, and at Massey University in New Zealand. Martin is a 2020 Design Incubation Fellow and author of 2 chapters in Ethics in Design and Communication, New Critical Perspectives. Sarah's design work has won multiple awards and been published by the Graphie, the Paris Design Awards, London International Creative, and the Creative Communication Awards. Her work uses dark storytelling that eschews formulaic narratives in order to promote self-efficacy, learning, and participation. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, Carey. I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully this works. And hopefully you're seeing a black screen, right? Not my notes. Great, perfect. I want to also start with some thank yous to Carey, of course, the Wylie House, IU Libraries, Arts and Humanities Council, as well as my fellow artists. Sarah?
Joann, oh,
Sarah, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you do need to switch your screen because we are seeing your notes.
oh no, okay. Let me restart that. I have to write out all of my thank yous, as you just saw. Make sure I get everyone's name correct. Okay, let's try that again. How about now, black screen or notes?
Notes.
Okay, we tried.
I did in advance when I shared screen, I did advanced, and then you draw the box around the screen that you want to share. Try that if nothing else works.
Love it. We're doing it together. It's like I'm passing the needle back and forth to Molly in a piece of artwork that is this conversation.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Looks great.
let's try this. How about that? Are my secrets secret now?
I think your secrets are secret.
Good. They're precious. Okay. So welcome again. Let's start over. My name is Sarah. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I was in the middle of thanking my incredible artists and colleagues who were also in this exhibit with me, Joann and Sean, Molly, Carissa, Lyndon, Nathan, and Katrina, and of course all the staff who also helped make this exhibit and programming possible. I'm indebted to you and all of your efforts. My piece is entitled Where the Shadow Falls. And it is, I developed this for the exhibit, and it is a cup paper. Before I continue, are you seeing movement? How about now?
Yes. Movement, yes.
Okay. So many technical little difficulties. Thanks for learning with me, everybody. All right. So my piece is called Where the Shadow Falls, and it's a cut paper stop motion animation. It's projected into the women's workroom, which is room 202 of the Wylie House Museum. And you actually saw it referenced in Joann's talk. So right outside that room is where she did her inverted silhouette of Lizzie. And so my piece focuses on the forgotten artistry of another woman who is integral to the domestic space of Wylie House, who is Maggie Wylie Millett. And so the piece is in direct dialogue with the recorded shadows that are part of the permanent collection of the family of silhouettes that are on the mantle. So these silhouettes are permanently part of the Wylie House Museum. And so my piece, the video that I created, the stop motion animation, references both these pieces, but also the journals and the letters of the Wylie Museum collection, in which the dreams of freedom and a life of artistic practice in New York and Philadelphia, these dreams that that Maggie recorded in her journals and letters were part of the inspiration that inspired my work. She wrote about this alongside and maybe before the obligations of marriage and motherhood in the 19th century really diverted her path. And so I focus on my Maggie's oil paintings. She also did the IU Trident that's also in the permanent collection. And so she had this practice of artistry, and particularly painting and drawing, that wasn't really represented in the works of the Wylie House. And so I created a piece as an intervention that shows an alternate space where she could be the artist that she kind of dreamed about and wrote about herself as in these journals. So this piece, the China cup that she did make, that's part of the permanent collection, is in the dining and family room. And I found Maggie's an important narrative to highlight, as today women are still oppressed around the world, their rights, their dreams, their futures unacknowledged. So the piece focuses on three main motifs. The first motif is the shadow. A shadow is necessary in order to create the original silhouettes of the woman's workroom. A shadow is an absence of light. It is the opposite of a self. It is the opposite of form. And traditionally, the way these silhouettes were created is they are actually an early form of photography in the most literal sense. So if you break down the Latin of photography, drawing with light, photograph. And so these silhouettes are traced with a device called a physionotrace. And you use a candle and a piece of paper, and you physically trace the absence of light. And so I was interested in the physionotrace's process of producing multiple shadow copies simultaneously. Again, it's a very early form of the photographic method of reproduction that we think of today. And so I wanted to highlight that to 21st century viewers and visitors of the Wylie House. So we never see the woman who Maggie really was clearly. We don't see it clearly, we just see the trace, only at a distance and without full clarity of detail, like the reduced, flattened black void of silhouette portraiture. I also wanted to highlight the vulnerability of the medium of black paper silhouettes, linking the loose outlines on fragile paper to the vulnerable identity of women in the 18th and 19th century. The second motif that I focused on is authorship. So the silhouette animation of Maggie relies on the portraits that we do have as reference, but who is responsible for authoring those documents and keeping those documents as artifacts of truth. So by animating the silhouette, I tried to give Maggie, through myself and my practice, an authority to create, an authority that she didn't have in real life, showcasing her artistry in a way mostly forgotten to history. The piece also calls into question the institutional narratives that shape whose deeds get recorded in the course of history. So in this way, truth, the consecrated truth in traditional history painting is also called into question, of which there is a lot in the Wylie House Museum. And so I'm just kind of showing little clips of the animation as I go through this. The third motif that I focused on is the text. So both the text of the written word of Maggie's journals and her letters and other archival documents, but also as a direct juxtaposition to the image. So text and image play this kind of balanced role within the piece. I project a lot of typographic information onto the room, so her exact words from her letters, in order to emphasize the difference between what the record states and what might have been. So through a careful play of language and letter form, I see this component as trying to lead viewers into a critical understanding of the past, while also proposing an examination of contemporary power dynamics in writing and whose story gets told. The work is also an homage to early animators, particularly Lotte Renninger, another overlooked female artist who pioneered silhouette animation in the early 20th century, as well as contemporary artists like Carol Walker, whose paper silhouettes challenge normative historical narratives. But ultimately, this piece highlights what we know of Maggie's artwork and proposes what might have been lost, refuting this romantic promise of conventional female roles, aka marriage and motherhood, in the 19th century, and highlighting again the kind of artistry that might have been if had Maggie had more freedom to choose a path forward for herself. And then I thought it might be interesting to also share with you some photos of my process, because it is very physical and hands-on until I take it into the final stage of post-production and the final stage of animating, but it is stop motion. So I take every frame by hand. I also cut everything out and move everything around. There's me for scale to show you how I layer and achieve a very true sense of depth. So I do rack the camera lens through space. That is not a effect in post-process. It's a real effect of the lens and light. And then this is, again, a shot of process. Ultimately, I ended up cropping to be conversation with the round and circular silhouettes of the permanent collection. But this is, again, to kind of show you the process of setting this work up. So that's it. Thank you so much. Thanks for bearing with me with my technical difficulties.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm so glad that you showed pictures of your process, because I was going to invite people, and I still will invite you all to visit our exhibition website so that you can see the studio visit and more of Sarah's process. I was really impressed by all that goes into the work that she does. Okay, so moving on, we're going to invite Sean Starowitz to join us and share with you. Sean is a graduate of the Interdisciplinary Arts Program at the Kansas City Art Institute, a 2012 Rocket Grant recipient, and a 2014 Charlotte Street Foundation Visual Art Award Fellow. He has been published in Proximity Magazine and Temporary Art Review, and has lectured for the World Arts and Cultures Department at UCLA and the American University in Washington, D.C. Sean is currently the Assistant Director of the Arts for the City of Bloomington, Indiana. He focuses on artistically engaging with the public by imbuing his work with regional and spatial histories, everyday practices, and community engagement. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Carey. Can everybody hear me? Yep, it's looking good. Yeah, thanks to the Wylie House and IU Archives and the Provost Office for putting on such an incredible opportunity and exhibition, and to my fellow artists, Joann and Molly and Sarah. It's been really great to be here, and you know, I'm honored to be able to share with you all a little bit about my work. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to bring up my share screen. We're going to go. Let's see. All right, so we're looking at the kind of informal monument and memorial to Breonna Taylor. I just want to kind of remind folks that we're pushing almost 200 days without seeing justice for Breonna Taylor and her family. But this is a photo I took this summer at a renaming of what is known as Injustice Square now down in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm from Louisville originally. So my work, my studio work, my professional work is different, and Carey mentioned that in terms of working for the city of Bloomington, but my studio work has really focused on shifting kind of the white imaginary around monuments, truth and reconciliation, and the confrontation of white supremacy within the built environment. So I've done a lot of work around the South and around the Midwest around investigating this type of work. And so the Wylie House offered a really interesting opportunity to work in this context, working through an archive. Specifically, I'm going to talk about two pieces that I have in the show. And the first body of work is the pastoral landscapes. And so these are inspired directly by, these are Cornelius Perring postcards that were written. Let me bring up my notes here on my other device. Apologies. That were written, specifically there's a letter from August 27th, 1833, which is kind of this interesting snapshot of Monroe County and this kind of 19th century romanticized landscape, right? And so for me, it's as we think about how landscape changes in memory and impact, and how we are living in this kind of current conversation within the built environment. This is actually not Bloomington, this is West Lafayette. I chose another college town in Indiana to kind of reference the buildings for my work. So as we see Cornelius Perring's seminary images here, we shift to my kind of work, or my kind of contribution, which is really confronting this kind of romanticized 19th century landscape with the contemporary architecture that we are seeing in our communities right now. So these kind of boxy, bland dorm rooms that are put up as another form of colonization and displacement within the built environment. So really kind of critiquing architecture, city planning, developers specifically around the role that the built environment plays in colonization and displacement of individuals in the landscape. So these are in the bedroom upstairs. This is the kind of image. I made a series of 8 of these that are kind of just referencing these kind of very nice kind of, 19th century snapshots of Monroe County. The other body of work is really, and just in terms of research, I view reading and research actually as a part of a studio practice. A lot of artists don't. And so for me, the works that I constantly revisit are Saidiya Hartman's A Venus in Two Acts, which is really a really seminal work about being a contemporary Black woman writing in terms of an archive. About the fact that there's never been a women's perspective of the transatlantic slave trade, and the fact that that is lost to history, and it is totally irrecoverable. And then Catherine McKittrick's work, which she published a book a few years ago called Demonic Grounds, Black Women in the Cartographies of Struggle, which really shifts the role that geography and cultural geography plays in terms of the kind of feminist narrative, but also the role of new ways of engaging history through geography and Black bodies. Specifically speaking, and I think it's important to acknowledge that I am a white cis male, and understanding that my work cannot actually uncover or tell the story of those lost against the archive, right? And those that are not included in the archive. Erasure is very real and displacement is very real. So the role and the responsibility of artists to investigate this work is very critical and very important. This is an original sketch that I kind of sent to Carey when I was thinking about the work, tying it to the architecture of the building and actually thinking about a work on the outside of the building. The grounds are very beautiful. They're also kind of a snapshot to the 19th century landscape that we would somewhat see, the relocated barn and the kind of clearance of the property and the kind of square footage you would see. It would actually be a little bit larger, obviously being a farm. But this is Monumental Void. And really it's that kind of embodiment of Saidiya Hartman's work in a lot of ways. And to quote Saidiya, "It is a history of an unrecoverable past. It is a narrative of what if might have been or could have been. It is history written with and against the archive." So I think it's really interesting that Wylie House has this opportunity and has presented this opportunity to uncover these stories and to use artists as a lens and a gateway into this kind of exhibition and this body of work to talk about this. This is the starting point. As we all know, monuments are works of fiction. It's about who gets to tell history. And so for us to be able to revise and revisit and do our research, as we've seen from Molly's work to Sarah's work to Joann's work, this all sheds new light on those kind of irrecoverable stories and narratives that we haven't been able to access before. And so that's the Monumental Void with the lovely peonies that grow on the property. I got this spring. So that's essentially the body of work that I've been exploring as of recent in terms of the Monumental Void work, and looking at how this work, honestly, and how my work cannot and should not be at the expense of those who are so intimately affected by the loss of history. Usually that's how monuments, markers, public memorials work, and that this work must embrace self-reflection. And we need to do this, and we need to reflect on the role that white supremacy plays within our built environment without reiterating the historical traumas of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other communities affected by the atrocities of white supremacy. Monuments have never been more critical to our discourse. Our communities, as we've seen this summer, we've seen over 160 Confederate monuments topple since May. And we have a lot of work to do in terms of what stories we want to share and what narratives we want to identify ourselves with. To that end, this is a piece that I just recently put on view in Louisville, Kentucky, to tie back to Breonna Taylor. This is called Statues Are Silent Teachers, which is actually tied to a federal order by the Trump administration for their new proposal for a national memorial garden for American heroes. It's a very interesting executive order. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest investigating it on your own and determining your own kind of interest in that. And then I also with my work here in Indiana, I've actually had the pleasure and honor to work with Joann on a separate exhibition called Paper Pavilions, which looks at the role that artists play investigating landscape, mainly the natural landscape of the Indiana Uplands region, working with the Sycamore Land Trust and dealing with race identity within that landscape. It's 9 artists across from the Midwest. It's in Columbus, Indiana, and it's on view till November 21st. And we have a variety of different options. Similar to Wylie House, there's an online version. You can see it in person with a mask and all that kind of stuff. So happy to answer any questions, and looking forward to this lovely conversation. And thank you all so much for joining us this late in the evening on Wednesday.
Thanks so much, Sean. Well, I want to open it up to questions from everybody. So you can put your questions in the chat. Mara will correct me if I'm wrong and help me look to those. In the meantime, I'll start us off with a question or two. And so I'm going to ask all the artists, you can either, each of you may respond, or if you don't feel moved to respond, that's fine too. So my first question to you is, wondering if you can talk about how call and response is different or similar to other exhibits you've participated in, from its location, venue in a historic space, to its intent to illuminate lesser known people and histories. So how has it aligned or diverged with other work you've done and shows you've participated in?
I'm going to start by saying that it's really, for me, it was brand new working in a historic space, especially with archived materials from queer people 100 years ago. But I also think it's a testament to the originality of your vision for the Wylie House, Carey, that you're bringing in artists to tell stories from these like tiny fragments of information that you guys have archived. So that's my take on it, is that it's new for me. Literally getting a call from my sister. Sorry. She's like, is it done yet? Did you do okay? She doesn't know this is happening. But anyway, but as far as my practice goes, it was just totally different and such a wonderful push to work with different content, different subjects, different media. It was really a wonderful experience for me, but I'll leave space for everyone else.
For me, in terms of process, it wasn't much different in terms of that a lot of my artwork is heavily inspired by material research. So I spend a lot of time museums, websites, historical sites, doing a lot of research. And so that aspect of it was similar, but the opportunity to actually have the artwork in the house and have the other objects in the house be part of the conversation, that was completely new and really, really exciting. So when I was in my studio, I would get a little bit like, I don't know about this piece. Is this really going to work? But then when you put it in the house, it said something completely different. And so being able to play with space in that way was really important.
Thanks, Joann and Molly. Sean or Sarah, do you feel like jumping in?
Yeah, it's super important, right? Museums have to reinvent themselves to present new material to audiences, right? And this is a great, fabulous way to recontextualize the work that's there in conversation with contemporary artists, to kind of like literally let the museum breathe a little bit, right? In a new way. And I think it's really important. Also, like, for us as artists, and I don't want to speak on the behalf of anybody else, but like the role that the access to archives is so important for artists, and to be able to work and do that research and look into that, and then to be able to have a larger conversation about where the work sits is so very unique, right? And that kind of way. So it's a risk that has not been taken by too many archives and too many museums, unfortunately, to have new material versus old material and humidity and all this kind of stuff. You know, we even at the opening, we had the challenge of the fact that there's no electrical lights, right? Like, you know, so like that type of opportunity, that's an opportunity though. It's not actually limited in its approach. So for us, I think it's all really important, and it's a really important conversation to be working with these archives and working with museums to tell and recontextualize new stories and new narratives.
Yeah, I'll just tack on that more and more I keep finding my practice is investigating site-specific work. A lot of my creative work does look at storytelling and like kind of try to tease out the role, the context in which those stories are told. As an artist and a designer, context for me is really important. And I think the way that I considered this project parallels the way that I think about my normal practice, which is that the artist's role is to try to provide a rhetorical space for history to be questioned, who is telling that history, what stories are coming to the fore, and that we can create these kinds of spaces, and ultimately they're gifts. They're gifts to ourselves. They're gifts to the soul of the people around us, our communities, and engaging. I mean, the myth of the artist is kind of solo, working alone in their white studio is an outdated kind of methodology. All artists and designers should be engaging in their community, and part of that community work is looking at where we get our identities from, and that's history. And we should be, like Sean and Molly and Joann have said, we should be questioning that history. So I will say one of the great things about this project was that there was so much rich archival material, and the staff and Carey were, I will say that was different than what I've normally had, was people so knowledgeable where I could say like, is there a ghost story about X, Y, or Z? And Carey would pop in and be like, well, there is this one story. And normally I've had to kind of do a lot of that digging on my own. So I just felt really grateful to have such knowledgeable librarians and archivists and staff who helped ease me into the material that was new and novel.
Thanks.
Carey, can I chime in to tell the ghost story of when we were installing?
Oh yeah, I forgot.
It's very quick. So Carey and I were installing and testing the phone and putting it in. And as we were putting it in, a phone across the house that never gets used, that possibly wasn't even hooked up for many, many years, rung. And we both jumped. And my phone wasn't even hooked up yet. And also it doesn't have the original ringer. It has a digital ringer now. It doesn't even have the possibility of ringing. But I felt like the house approved. It was fun. Yeah.
It's a rotary phone that is in a basement stairwell that was used for practical and safety purposes by staff previously, and had not been working for a long time. So I see a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll address those perhaps. And Mara, yell if I miss any. So I saw the question, is Wylie House open? And Wylie House Museum, unfortunately, is not open right now. We're being extra super duper cautious. We have small spaces to navigate, and so it's difficult to do with groups, and we have a small staff, and we really relied on volunteers, and our volunteers are home keeping themselves and their families safe right now as well. We have been, I will share that we've been open to classes. And so, in fact, a couple of classes used the exhibition as the focus of their research this summer. And they put up big tents out in front in the yard, and then went into the museum in small groups to tour and study the works of art, and that was really fantastic. So we look forward to being open, and one of the wonderful benefits of the digital mediums we've been able to develop is that you can access it now while we're closed. Another question I saw, which might help give you some background, is from Danielle McClelland asking, she says, I'm really curious about Wylie House's process in developing the project concept, funding development, gaining buy-in from board and other stakeholders, finding artists interested in taking on the project. So this really developed out of, first of all, two background goals, which I think I mentioned in the opening. One, we have been trying to develop broader and deeper interpretation at Wylie House. And also we've been trying to integrate contemporary art and support arts at the museum over the past few years as much as possible. And a year ago, in September 2019, I attended a wonderful national conference, and I heard the director of Woodlawn Mansion, a home in Virginia, speak about an exhibition that she curated called Makers in the Mansion, in which she invited local professional Black artists to come into the mansion and reinterpret the space and tell the stories of the history of the Woodlawn home. The Woodlawn home had enslaved people on it. And the work that the artist brought to the exhibition I found to be really powerful. And for me, it was a moment of, oh, those two goals can not only be combined with each other, but really support each other and enhance each other. So I brought the idea to Ed Dallas Commentale, who is a Associate Vice Provost of Arts and Humanities here at Indiana University. And he is the lead for the Arts and Humanities Council, who has been developing so many wonderful cross-campus interdisciplinary programs for the arts and humanities here in Bloomington. He has supported Wylie House and some other endeavors, and I wanted to know if this was something that would fit. And within the first few minutes of that conversation, I got really lucky, and he offered to integrate the idea of the exhibition into the upcoming spring program, the Indiana Remixed, in which they were already planning to highlight contemporary Indiana artists. And so it was a wonderful way to get Wylie House involved, support this idea. The only trick to this was that I had 1 week to share with him the plan, the budget, and he wanted to know who the artists were going to be. And I had no idea who that was going to be and what that was going to look like. I was just throwing out an idea, thinking a few years down the road. So the funding came from the Arts and Humanities Council. They supported this, and that allowed us to pay the artists. The next step was that we put a call out, and the call, because we had to work so quickly, really just I began to reach out to people I know here on campus, and had them reach out to other people, and to get the word out to artists that they thought might be interested in this project. And we put the call out. We actually had 24 artists submit proposals. Each of those artists came to the museum. They took a tour, at least one tour of the museum. Some took more than one tour. Each of them got a large binder full of information. Might have been a little much at the time, but they got the historic context of the home, archival information, links to more resources, and then they only had a few weeks to turn around and give us a proposal. I pulled together a couple of other people at IU to help me form a committee, and we began going through what was the most difficult part of this entire thing, which was choosing artists. I hadn't anticipated that all of the artist proposals were incredible and powerful, and we had to select just 8. So as you can see from these 4, we didn't go wrong, and the other 4 are just as incredibly talented and intelligent and insightful. I want to mention that they didn't get the information that they were selected for this until I think it was the second week of December, and they had to install the last week of February. So they did this powerful, incredible, original artwork within the span of just a few weeks. It was really incredible. So I think that maybe I answered. Let me know if I didn't answer all the questions. Are there other questions I have not seen?
Yeah, Carey, we did have someone ask a question for Sarah Edmands Martin about the question says, did she do any other creative works besides painting and drawing? I think I botched that question, but yes. Sarah, did she create anything beyond the teacup and the saucer? Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah.
Oh, yeah. And thanks, Bailey, for the question. So she did drawings and paintings. She did paintings of her family. And Carey, you can correct me if I get any of this wrong, because it's been a minute since I looked at the documents. But she did some portraiture, smaller kind of painting portraiture of her family, a little bit of self-portraiture, and that's mostly it. Again, Carey, feel free to hop in if I've messed that up. She wrote a lot about wanting to get more training. Like, I think she kind of recognized that she had a passion and certainly like a novice skill. But she also knew that she didn't have access here in Indiana at the time to really develop that skill. And she kind of, she identified New York and Philadelphia as places that and I think she said something like, if I didn't have to stay here and like raise this family, I might consider going and doing that. And so I really kind of latched on to that possibility. And it's not to say that she didn't execute her creativity. She was very creative. She didn't apply that creativity to other things around the house, but in terms of what you might consider a traditional education, and certainly what people at that time would have considered a traditional artistic education, that was pretty limited. I hope I answered your question.
We also have a question for Joann about information about who took the images of Lizzie Breckenridge. So who was taking those pictures, who made the choice to take those pictures. And then also, is there any more to her story? Any chance of finding just more about who she was, how she was, family, and all of those kinds of things?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was a grandson of, I want to say Andrew Wylie, that was interested in photography and took photographs of Elizabeth towards the end of her life. So she's a little older in those. She came to live at the Wylie House when she was 14 years old, and slavery hadn't been legally abolished in the United States. She came a few years before then. There was some kind of like rumor or possibility that her family was actually involved in the Underground Railroad. There were a newspaper article celebrating her years of service, and of course, saying things like she loved being with her white family more than her own kind. But when you look at, for example, her will, she left money to like almost every single relative that she had. So she did have family. One of the amazing things about her story is she stopped working at the Wylie House and was able to purchase her own home in Bloomington, Indiana. And unfortunately, she passed away. I think it was like several weeks or even like 3 months maybe after she purchased the home, she passed away. So yeah, it was kind of heartbreaking to read about her. And what was it like to be a Black woman in Indiana during that time? And what were her dreams and aspirations? And so it was a fascinating story.
Yeah, thanks, Joann. I want to add a little bit to that. Joann really brought Lizzie to life throughout the house, and I don't know how clear that was in her presentation. That was her intention, and truly, almost every single room of this large house now has a piece of artwork representing Lizzie, and it really does bring home the fact that she was present in that space. That was her home for decades. And while we continue to do research actually on Elizabeth, and we've begun to do research into her mother. Her mother is referenced as being perhaps a conductor of the Underground Railroad in Monroe County, and which is really incredible. We have more information about Lizzie than most late 1800s Black people in the Bloomington area, but still not very much. at all, unfortunately, but we do continue to do research. I saw a question about from James Meek. Will all or some of the art become a permanent visible part of the house and its tours? And I love this question because I don't want to leave here this evening without sharing the wonderful, wonderful news, another silver lining, a big one that came out of this exhibition. And that is that it inspired a gift from a woman, Linda Hunt, who may be here with us tonight, who is a friend and supporter and volunteer at the Wylie House. And she gifted us money so that we could retain some of the pieces. And in order to do that and make that selection, which you can also imagine it was incredibly difficult, she asked that I convene a small committee to look at the artwork, review it, make decisions about which pieces should stay, which pieces that have we had whose impact will remain without them being physically present, and other considerations such as how they will work long term. And so I'm happy to report that that committee made those decisions. We will be retaining some of the artwork, so some of those pieces will be present in the house in the future when we open up. And the other wonderful, fantastic thing about Linda's gift is that it inspired the creation of a new fund, so the Museum Collections Fund, which will allow us to continue to do this work, to acquire future works of art and care for them. So this is going to be an ongoing endeavor. Call and Response is the first of what I hope will be many series like this, and we are indebted to Linda Hunt for her incredible, wonderful gift. So thanks so much, Linda. Yeah, it has been just a fantastic ride, this whole process. So it's 8:10. Are there any other questions before we begin to wind?
If folks are still here and interested, there was one other question about, I think it really gets to the process of picking the artist. And as you and others were narrowing down the 8, did you think about how the works would play off of each other? Like, for example, this person, Deb, asks about some of the other artists such as Carissa, and knowing that Molly and Carissa were both using sound, and would it be, in addition to creating the visual landscape, the soundscape that artists would be creating, and how that would play off of each other?
So yes and no. I'm not an art curator. And so a lot of things that came up were brand new to me, things I hadn't considered. I got really lucky in that the artists proposed different spaces and different people and subjects. I'll mention quickly that the other artists, Carissa Carmen, she highlighted the lives of children in the home who we hadn't thought about as marginalized voices, but truly 20 children grew up in that home. And so their presence, of course, is important as well. So Carissa Carmen, she had a sound piece that played, so you could get the sense that the children were there. And then Katrina Mitten is an artist. She's a Miami artist of Northern Indiana, and she installed 4 pieces that spoke to both the history and the contemporary experience of the Miami Native people here in Indiana. Nathan Foxton is a painter who chose the same collection and people as Molly. So that we didn't feel like that was a conflict, though, because their mediums were so very different. Nathan was doing a painting in which he captured their relationship very differently than how Molly did. And then our 8th artist was Linda Tien, and I think Linda might be here this evening. And Linda's installation in the kitchen spoke to the identity of the immigrant experience of people who have heritage, two different heritages or multiple heritages, and how identity works. And hers is a fantastic piece as well. So no, I didn't really think about it ahead of time. I got really lucky is what happened. And things worked out really, really well. I think that's one of the, it's not a regret, but certainly things moved really quickly for this process.
And that may be just one tiny quick follow-up. Someone did ask, is this a format that could maybe be adopted elsewhere? Are there plans to do, and likewise, are there plans to do similar things like this at Wylie House moving forward?
Yes, certainly at Wylie House. And definitely I'm hoping that this sort of contemporary arts exhibition and illuminating these lesser known stories through art will be something that happens other places. And to that end, I've been doing some presentations this year, some national conferences, in the hopes that the work that the Woodlawn Mansion did and inspired me, that the Wylie House Museum Call and Response will inspire others as well. So thanks for that question. I certainly hope that this carries on. As you can see, these artists are absolutely incredible and helped us so very much. And it was an honor to work with them. And it's been wonderful to have you all join us this evening. I hope you had a good time, and I hope you'll come visit the Wylie House Museum when we're open again. And in the meantime, please check out our virtual tours. We have a virtual tour not only of Call and Response, but also just the traditional, the house itself without the art in it. And feel free to reach out to me or Mara if you have questions about this exhibition or the new Museum Collections Fund. Yeah, I look forward to hopefully seeing you all in person. Be well and take care. Thanks so much to Mara, Sarah, Joann, Molly, and Sean. I appreciate you spending your evening with us. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good night.